This is Block 11, Reagan's Revolution, Section 3, Reagan at Home, with the section The Deficit. Now, one of the things that, critics of Reagan said when Ronald Reagan was in office was that his economic policies led to way too much federal debt. And there was a reason for that. First of all, Reagan cut taxes. Second of all, Reagan did not cut spending, really. And third of all, he had a massive military buildup. It led to unprecedented federal debt. So let's take a look at the chart here. When Reagan took office in 1981, the federal deficit was, it looks like, about $1 trillion. There's $2 trillion, it's about half of that, about $1 trillion. And you can see that through the 1980s, that deficit seemed to double from about $1 trillion, and when Reagan left office here in 1989, it was over $2 trillion. So every year, Reagan ran a deficit of about $200 billion, leading, by the time he left office, to a debt that was over $2 trillion. As we saw, though, that was, there was a lot of reasons for that. The tax cuts were not necessary, that none of them were the reason for the deficit in its entirety. That the tax cuts, conservatives argued, had created growth. The Democrats in Congress had not cut spending the way Reagan had wanted to cut spending. Plus, Reagan's Cold War strategy of a intense military buildup led to these deficits. And you can see that the deficit did double in Reagan's time in office. And then you can also see what's happened with the deficit since then. That, when Bill Clinton came to power, it was here. Then when Clinton left, it was here. Bush came to power here and left here. And, President Obama became president here, and it has continued to rise faster and faster and faster. Another thing, what the debt did was it made the dollar weaker. It increased interest rates. That if, Americans were going to continue to borrow money, in order to borrow money with a higher debt, interest rates are going to go up, which increased the value of the dollar. However, as dollars grew more expensive, American goods became more expensive to import. That if dollars are if the United States is exporting steel, and the dollar is, the value of the dollar, the cost of the dollar is greater, then other countries are going to be less willing to import steel from the United States because it's more expensive. And American manufactured goods became more difficult to export, and that led to what was known excuse me, as an imbalance in trade. That already when Reagan took office in 1980, the United States was importing more stuff than it exported. And by the time Reagan left office in 1989, you can see that the United States was definitely importing more stuff than it was exporting. And then, of course, this trend has gotten worse and worse as time has gone on, largely due to the price of oil, more than anything, really. But this was kind of the final death knell of American heavy industry like steel. Unable to compete against foreign competition, with unionization causing the costs for business to go up. In the 1980s, a lot of those old steel mills, steel plants, heavy factories closed their doors for the last time. And you can see one of the reasons why in this imbalance in trade. By the time Reagan left office, the United States was a debtor country and a country that imported more than it exported. And a lot of people, kind of economic nationalists, took a look at that and said that's not a good thing. Another thing that happened during the time of Reagan's economic policies, and we can call them 1980 to 2007, so this is a pretty good chart, is how much more money did people make. And what this chart is showing us is that the wealthiest Americans, their after-tax income, so the amount of money they made after taxes, in these 25 years grew almost 300%, which is a lot more than anybody else. So if you were at the tippy top of the American socioeconomic period, these 25 years saw you become richer than you ever had been in your life. But it's not like that was at the expense of everyone else's growth. That the top 20% grew by 65%. The fourth quintile from about 60 to 8, the 60th to 80th percentile grew by 43%. The quintile in the middle, kind of your average American's after-tax income, grew by 35%. And even those at the very bottom grew by almost 20%. So there was an inequality in growth, that the incomes of wealthier Americans grew faster than the incomes of average Americans. Now, this was largely due to supply-side economics. If you cut taxes for, the highest earners more than they're going to make more money. If you allow the highest earners more freedom to grow and expand their businesses, they're going to make more money. And although kind of middle-of-the-road Americans did not get the same growth as wealthier Americans, interest rates went down, inflation went down, and the U.S. standard of living went up. Americans in 2007 are living much more luxurious lives with a lot more stuff than Americans were in 2007. That the technology is different, cars are safer, cars are more efficient, cars are bigger, houses are bigger. We live lives of more comfort and ease in 2007 and 2013 as we did in 1979. Now, this is a trade-off. It's a clear trade-off, and whether you think this trade-off is a decent enough trade-off depends on your political views. Conservatives are going to say, look, you can't, that the 1970s showed that all that stagnation, the stagnation of the 70s, conservatives say, was bad for everybody. So you unleash the economy through supply-side economics, and yeah, you're going to get a lot of growth at the top, but you're going to get growth everywhere. And as long as this growth is still happening, we can deal with the wealthiest Americans getting even wealthier. Also, the fact of the matter is that American ability to move between classes is still prevalent. That a lot of people who end up here, or even end up here, don't necessarily start here. And a lot of people who start here don't necessarily end up here. That there is still a lot of movement in American class, even today. So that's a conservative argument. A liberal argument is that, government should not be out there benefiting the wealthiest 1% of America at the expense of everybody else, and you have to lower this number to raise these numbers up. Whichever side you believe will mark you as either a conservative or as a progressive. But that's what Reagan did, and you can't deny the 25 years of economic growth, and you can't deny the fact that standard of living went up for pretty much everybody, not at the very, very bottom.